Hello and welcome back, all you fabulous fighting fantasy aficionados, for another episode of Freeway Fighter. Now, if you watched the last episode, you know that I actually, sort of beat the game last time. I did a one dodgy die roll that I had to pretend I didn't make in order to claim victory over the book. Now, since then, I've mapped the whole of this book, and one of the reasons I've been able to do it so quickly is because I found a new way to do it. If you remember my Return to Firetop Mountain episodes, my map looks like this. And it's quite time-consuming doing this by hand, even though it is more satisfying. And I've been wondering if there was a way to do it on a computer, and I did find a very useful way to do it, and I'll show you in a moment. I will also show you in a moment my calculations for the optimum route through the game, which I didn't take last time, by the way. There is a point towards the end, as you may recall, where I'm fighting the gang leader known as the Animal, and you are seriously disadvantaged because at that point you will have skill reduced by 1 for earlier reasons, and he's doing twice as much damage as you are for each successful attack, which means you're very unlikely to succeed. At that point in the story, your best option is actually to have a gunfight with his gang, and you're more likely to survive that way. Now, of course, the reason I'm making a map of, I'm finished talking about the Animal. The reason I'm making a map of the whole book, meaning I'm going to every single paragraph and checking out what the options are, is so I can make sure that I find the optimum route, the safest route, the one with the highest chance of victory through this book. And because the map is quite convoluted, as this is just an earlier sketch of the beginning of the game, there's a lot more going on later. Finding the optimum path is actually a little bit tricky in this one. I've found there is actually, there's about 2 possible paths too, because there is the council leader, Sinclair, that you are being told that you should try to rescue if you find the gang that kidnapped him. If you go and rescue him, that's one path you don't actually have to take. You can get to the end of the story, to the last paragraph, which in this case isn't 400 but 380, without doing that. But I think it feels a bit wrong not to do that. I think that for me that's part of the game, and so I've included that in my walkthrough, and the one I'm using for my calculations of rescued Sinclair. There was another thing I was wondering about for a short while, whether it would make sense to pick up a knuckle duster or not. Because if you have a knuckle duster, the hand-to-hand combat with the Animal would be easier. But then, of course, later I realized that your combat with the Animal isn't necessary. In fact, if you go the easiest path through this book, most of your battles will be vehicle combats. There'll be 2 shooting battles, and that is about it, actually. There's not much else. You don't need to do anything besides that. So there's hardly... so the only thing you're using skill for, really, is skill tests, which usually involves dangerous, tricky driving. And so by far the most important ability in this game book, as in many others, is skill. When I've been doing my calculations, I've sort of tried different stamina values and also armor values for the car. And I found that those have very little effect on the overall survivability you have in the game. And of course, in this game, you also have quite a few med packs that you can use to regain 4 stamina when you're not fighting. So you have quite a few options to get back stamina. For your armor, for your car, you also have a few options of regaining armor. You regain 2 when you repair the car yourself, and you can regain 10 by going to a repair shop. Luck in the beginning of the game, you use 2 luck relatively soon, but then you regain 2 luck, so that's back to square one. Right at the end of the game, which is very linear, there are several luck tests in the roll. Most of them aren't that critical. You lose. It becomes just a little bit trickier to do some things. You lose a little bit of stamina. It's not that vital. So the 2 things that really matter in this game are skill and firepower. Of course, the car's firing strength, and those 2 are the most the ones that make the biggest difference when you put them into a simulation and you change the numbers. And basically, in this game, if you've got a skill of less than 10, you can't win it. It's just well, it's not impossible, but it's less than 1% chance. Even if all the other stats are maximum, if you've got less than 10 skill, your chances of winning are something like 0.58% or 0.6%. So I'll show you all the calculations in a moment. Or the calculations. I haven't done the whole set like last time because I don't think it's necessary for this one. Right, so that's Freeway Fighter, and I'll show you a little bit of what I've been doing on my computer screen in a moment. I'm just thinking, is there anything else I wanted to show you? Yes. Another thing I do, of course, first I make a map of all the locations, and I make a note of all the battles, everything you pick up, everything you use, everything you test for, and then I write a list, a walkthrough list, and then I make a compressed walkthrough list, which basically is the things that I need to calculate. And ooh, there's a bit of a smudge there. Yeah. And then those are the things that I put into my simulation when I make that in BASIC. So I'll show you all that in a moment. So please bear with me while I go and find my computer screen and record that for you. So I'll be right back. Right, okay, so my webcam image is going to be really slow now, but that's okay. The main thing I'm trying to show you now is the mapping tool I'm using for mapping the game books, for mapping the Freeway Fighter. I've been using Twine, which is a software that is made for creating your own interactive fiction stories. And it has a very convenient feature. This is actually the entire map of Freeway Fighter. As you can see, it's very linear at the end. And along the way, there are a few sort of side things. And there's, of course, the western and eastern routes quite a bit of the way as well, with a few places where they cross over. And of course, in yellow here, that is my sort of walkthrough path that I made a note of. Right, so if I just show you how I've done this. So I've gone in, and for each paragraph in the text, I go in, I make a paragraph 1, and I write what information is important in that place to understand what's going on, and what hazards there are, what things there are to gain, what items you're using. And then in double square brackets, I can put in the pages that this paragraph go to, and they are created automatically, which is why it's so efficient to use this. So if I just created a random new one here, let's see, where do I make a new one now? Yes, plus passage, there we are. So if I just go in here and I put make a title, so this is paragraph 400, and I'll just put in the end question mark. Oh, my keyboard is a little bit weirdly placed now. And then this one goes to paragraph 402 and paragraph 407. And then I just press escape and it automatically creates those. So it's very easy to add more, and all the connections between the paragraphs are clear to see. and it is very convenient. Now, this is a free software. You can download it for your computer, or you can use it on your browser. I would recommend downloading it, because if you use it on your browser, it's actually saved in the browser data. So if you clear your browser history and cookies and everything, it also whatever you made disappears. If you save it on your computer, the map is saved as an HTML file automatically every time you make a change, which is very useful, and you can make a backup of it, of course. So that is the gist of that. So this is then all the map. I don't think there was anything else I wanted to say about the map now. Of course, I will try to tidy it up a bit and make a nicer version later. But for now, that is what I've done, and it is a lot faster than it took me a lot less time than to make the one for Return to Firetop Mountain, where I was doing everything by hand. Right, so that is out of the way. Now, for my simulation again, I'll try to make it a little bit clearer this time what I was doing for my own sake. I wanted on 10,000 runs. I noticed if I increase the number of runs beyond 10,000, the result doesn't change that much. So I thought I might as well just leave it a bit short, leave it quite a low number, so it doesn't take too long. And what it does is, first it starts by getting input of your skill, stamina, luck, firepower, and armor. In this case, of course, there are two extra abilities, the abilities of your car, rather than just your own abilities. And then it creates the initial values, and it creates the floating values from those, and then it counts something up, a counter that goes up by 1, and then it checks that counter against the run count, which is a total number. And if it's the counter for the run counter goes up to the same as the total run count, then it prints out a percentage, which is the winning percentage. And then it simulates every single combat, mostly vehicle combat. Of course, some use special rules, which also need to be done manually. And then I made subroutines for standard vehicle combat, testing luck, and testing skill, which are the ones you do the most. And every time you die, either from stamina going down to 0 or your car's armor going down to 0 and the car exploding, you are returned back to the beginning, and the turn counter goes up by 1 without the victory counter going up. So every time you get to quite to the end, exactly to the end, you've got a win counter down here, which then shows you how many times you actually won this. So that's how it works. And in very short terms, very easy actually. It's just basic. It's just lots of if statements and some go subs, and not much fancy stuff going on. Now, one of the things one just has to keep in mind, of course, is trying to make sure that all the variables are moved back to 0 if they're being used again in the next run. It's very easy to forget. Right, so to run this, we've done it like that, and it asks us what is our skill. So I'll put 12, stamina 36, luck 12, firepower 12, and armor 36. Those are the maximums, and it very quickly will give us a result of 66.17%. So if you have maximum abilities and you follow the optimum route through this game, your chances of winning are 2/3, which is pretty good. Definitely quite a bit better than Return to Firetop Mountain with its 25%. What happens if you do 12 skill, minimum stamina, minimum luck? I'll still go with 12 firepower, and minimum armor. So now, of course, only skill and firepower are at maximum. And then what happens is you get 60%. So that just goes to show the most critical abilities by far in this game are skill and firepower. Everything else you can almost ignore, actually. If you get low scores on those when you start your game, just ignore it. You'll be fine. Luck, a little bit dodgy, but of course, mostly when you fail a luck roll, you don't die. You just get damaged or injured. So it's not a big deal. So let's do 11 skill, 36 stamina, 12 luck, 12 firepower, and 36 armor. And it goes down to 47.6%. With about 10 skill, 36, 12, 12, 36, and now we're down to 23.39%. So you see it goes down really fast when skill goes down. And if skill, if I remember correctly, this is where it really, well, still a little bit actually. If skill is 9, 5.93%. Not as bad as I said earlier, actually. I think I remembered the wrong number. Skill 8. And we're down to 0.4%. So there you go, less than 9, not doable. What if you do something like, say, we do the minimum ones on everything apart from skill. So let's do 9, 26, 7, 7, and 26. So now 0.1%. Of course, when skill goes down, stamina becomes more important and luck becomes more important as well. Because now firepower is also important. Let's just see what happens with you if you take the same, if you just keep skill at maximum and everything at maximum and take the firepower down. So firepower 11, we're down to 66%. So that's about the same as before. So that doesn't make a big difference. Firepower 10, still very good. 65, okay. So the reason for this is, of course, that your armor is quite high, and you also there aren't actually that many vehicle combats you need to do. Another thing I've taken into account when I've done your simulation is that you have you've got 7 med packs left over that you can use to increase your stamina, and also there's a place where you can repair your car as well, and also if you follow the optimum path, you have 2 spare missiles. And in my simulation, I've used these 2 missiles to take out the 2 strongest vehicles that you're up against, that you're able to use missiles against. There is one that you may or may not meet, depending on a luck or skill roll. And then I've done it so that if you do meet it, you use a missile there. And if you don't meet it, use a missile later on something else. So there aren't that many vehicle combats either altogether. So there's actually very little combat when it comes down to it in this game if you follow the optimum path, which I think is done on purpose. Now, let's just do minimum values for everything else now. And firepower 10, as you can see now, the survivability goes down to 38.47%. And if you do something like, let's just put everything at maximum and just change the skill and firepower. So now if you do skill and firepower of 10 each, and the rest is the maximum, you get 23.17%, 9, and we're down to 4.99%. So all in all, your chances of winning aren't that bad, actually. So that is quite interesting numbers, I think, and a lot easier to survive than it is in Return to Firetop Mountain. And I think this is what I will be expecting of these early books, actually, that your survivability, if you follow the correct path, is going to be quite a bit higher than it is in Return. So there you go. Let's see, I'll just close this recording down if I can find it. Right, so there we are. The survivability of this game book isn't so bad after all. Well, which is what I was expecting, to be honest. 2/3, 66% roughly, which is pretty good. And it is mostly skill and firepower that really determines your course through this game and how likely you are to survive. So Good skill, of course, because skill, of course, isn't just fighting. You don't fight much using skill, but most of your skill is used for skill tests, and some of them actually lead to death directly as well in this book. So I would always recommend using a high skill, no less than 10 really, when playing this. And for firepower, I also wouldn't go below 10. So stamina, armor, not so critical. Luck, of course, it would be nice to have a little bit more than 7, but I would say 8 or 9 is fine. And you should be able to beat it, although it will be really difficult if you do that. So there we are. I've really enjoyed playing this game, I must say. This is the second game I've done properly now, or third, I would say, because of course in the old days I also did the Warlock of Firetop Mountain, which is the first one I just done really properly. And I didn't really do the other ones that well. I mean, I sort of played through Forest of Doom, I believe, and some other ones, but I just didn't analyze it so much or read everything so much or just do what I'm doing now. And I think I'm really enjoying it a lot more now than I used to. So there we go, Freeway Fighter. And for my next book, I haven't quite decided yet, but I will just suddenly show up, I believe, with a new video on a new game, and you'll know then. I'm still working on my map, of course, for Return to Firetop Mountain and for Freeway Fighter, and of course at some point I will make them available on my Patreon. I will make a video about it when I do, because it's quite a lot of work, and to be honest, it's not as much fun as it is to play the game. So, yeah, I know. I still want to do it. I mean, I still think it's fun, but it takes a bit longer because it's not as much fun. Right. I got a feeling there was something else I wanted to say about this book. Yeah. I did mention on my first episode that this seemed like a possible inspiration for Dark Future, and of course, indeed, it probably is. But it's part of the story because apparently, a few years before this book, Ian Livingstone made a game called Battle Cars, and I presume Battle Cars, of course, is led to this book and Dark Future, and also. This was about the same year as Mad Max 2 came out, and obviously there is something going on in the sort of culture of the day that making a book where you're fighting with cars sort of made sense, because Mad Max, of course, that's one of the things they do there. Another thing I'm going to make a video very soon now is my collection of fighting fantasy game books, because right now it is complete. That is to say, I'm not going to get any more, I don't think. Well, there is one book I don't have, which is the Steve Jackson Sorcery spell book. I don't know if I actually need it or not. I'll have a look at that when I get to Sorcery. But right now I actually have a complete collection of fighting fantasy game books, and it didn't break the bank or anything. I was able to get quite a good deal on some of the ones that usually run a bit more expensive. It's quite lucky there, and in very good condition as well. But I do have a little bit of work just making sure all the books are nice and clean, maybe doing some erasing in some books, and also some of the books could probably do with plastic covers as well, to preserve them. So I'm planning to do that one of these days very soon. And also I'll just talk you through my collection. Another thing I got recently as well, I didn't realize this book existed until very recently. This is You Are the Hero, a history of fighting fantasy game books by Jonathan Green. And it looks like a great fun thing to read, and of course obviously something that is mandatory to have in one's collection if one is into fighting fantasy game books. I'll say a bit more about this at some point as well. I still haven't read it. I just got it yesterday, and I'm really looking forward to rummaging through this one. I also have, even though that's not necessary for doing the game books, I've got Titan and Out of the Pit. Of course, these were meant to be used for advanced fighting fantasy, which was more a regular tabletop role-playing game system based on the fighting fantasy solo game books. And It's information about the world of fighting fantasy, and most of the books are set in a world called Titan. And After the Pit, which is the same title as the... I think that was a common section in the Warlock magazine, which didn't last very long, just lasted for a few years. A magazine by Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone about the fighting fantasy game books as well. And After the Pit was the name of the section where people talked about the monsters, and also people could submit their own monsters, I think, as well. And so I presume some of the monsters that ended up in fighting fantasy game books might actually have been invented by readers. Although I don't know exactly how that worked or which ones. I know that, of course, Steve Jackson, very inventive himself when it comes to monsters. Ian Livingstone, a little bit more of a traditionalist, I think. He likes his orcs and goblins and vampires and gorgons and things. So not as fanciful as some of Steve Jackson's ones. Right, so I think that's it for now. That's my Aftermath episode of, I should call it Aftermaths, because I'm of the British persuasion when it comes to how I speak my English. But Aftermath, yeah, it sort of makes sense as a word play, doesn't it? So there you go. So stand by for the next episode of Fighting Fantasy, and maybe I'll start a new game today or tomorrow. I don't know yet. And when I do, you'll be the first to know. But that is the end of this one for now, until I present a map at some point later. So thanks for watching, and you have a lovely day, and I'll see you again soon. So goodbye for now.